Welcome to my channel where we talk all things health and wellness as it pertains to menopause, fibromyalgia, lupus, and any other chronic disease or illness, because we know that we can live well despite our diagnosis. My name is Shonda, and today I'll be sharing my lupus story. So I was diagnosed with lupus about 25 years ago. And I had always dealt with a lot of joint pain, chronic fatigue, swelling of the hands and ankles. And I never really knew what was going on. I would go to the doctors. They would tell me, you need to lose weight. They would say, hey, we ran tests. Everything looks good. I'm not quite sure what's going on. Maybe it's all mental. I'm sure many of you that have lupus have probably heard a lot of those same responses from doctors. And for me, it was very disheartening because I really felt like I was not being heard. I think the biggest thing is knowing that something is wrong. You know your body. You know when things in your body are not working in the manner that they should be. And you're trying to relay this to somebody who is literally brushing you off. I want to say that my journey to a diagnosis was roughly 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. And it was a very challenging time. The week that I was actually diagnosed, about 2 months prior to that, I had literally been going to the doctor, if not every week, every other week, because the pain was unbearable. I was losing hair. Literally, when my cousin would do my hair and she would wash it, she would literally see the strands of hair falling out of my head to the point where it was no breakage on the end, like, you know, when we have situations where we're wearing ponytails and things like that, and we start to get that underlying breakage, or just like from not getting your ends clipped, you start to get that breakage. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about strings of hair, right, this long. And she could literally see the little bulb on the end of my hair where it fell out in the sink, and just no breakage. And for me, that felt like the breaking point, because that validated for me that there was something really taking place that I did not know about. And I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And, you know, every time there was a change in a symptom, I would go back and I would share that with the doctors, and they sent me to the dermatologist, and I went through the whole process of getting shots in my head to try to help with the hair loss. I was told that it could be stress, until eventually I ended up going to the doctor late one evening. It was a day that I'll never forget. The pain was unbearable. I don't think I worked any days that week because I was just in so much pain. And I was sharing, you know, just what I was going through with a good friend of mine's, and her mom came over and took me to the doctor. And at that time, the doctor that I was going to actually had a lab in the basement of their facility. And so at the doctor that I saw that day, same doctor office that I had been going to, but the doctor that I saw that particular day, that doctor was like fresh out of medical school and, you know, in the midst of, you know, practicing and seeing patients and things like that. But I think it was, I don't know if he was under fellowship or whatever, but he was new. He was a new doctor, I would say. And I started telling him my story. He started looking back through my files, and the more he read, the more he asked questions. I responded to his questions, and he said, I think I know what's going on with you. And I said, really? And he said, yes. And I can tell you it's not weight and it's not all in your mind if it's what I think it is. And so I said, okay. He asked me if, if I would be willing to go ahead and do some blood work that day, and then they could get the results back, and we could go from there. So, of course, I went forward with the blood work. Sent the blood work downstairs. I'm waiting on the lab to give me some results. And he comes back to me and he says, it is what I think it is, but I don't want to go into a lot of detail because I think you need to see a specialist. And the situation is pretty serious. And so I said, okay. And so he did share with me that I had some inflammation markers that were high. And at the time, I was completely clueless. I had no idea what he was talking about. But he went in his office and he came back and he was like, I called a rheumatologist. I want you to go in to see this doctor tomorrow. You need to see him immediately. And that for me was alarming. At that very moment, I was alarmed because we all know how difficult it is to get into a specialist. And it had to be about 6 o'clock that evening because it was a late day for the doctor's office. And so they had like one day a week where they stayed open later. And so it was that day. And for him to be able to make a phone call to another doctor and get me into that doctor's office the very next day, to me sounded an alarm that something very serious was going on. So fast forward to the following day, I went to that doctor's appointment. The doctor asked me a bunch of questions. I filled out a bunch of information. He ran some blood work and told me that he wanted me to come back in a couple of weeks. But in the interim, I got medication to kind of help me with a lot of the symptoms that I was experiencing, mainly pain. And that was my first time actually being on the medication prednisone. And so once the results came back, I went back for my appointment, and that's when he confirmed to me that I had a diagnosis that at that time was called mixed connective tissue disorder. And essentially mixed connective tissue disorder is, I think it's a failover diagnosis for when a lupus diagnosis doesn't come back positive, but also some of the other connective disorders aren't coming back positive either, but you're showing all the signs of a particular disease. So mixed connective tissue disorder could be lupus, lupus, scleroderma, Sjogren's, just a number of autoimmune diseases where it's like your symptoms are meshed between all of those diseases, but none of them individually are showing positive. And for years, I tested positive for mixed connective tissue disease until 1 year, my doctor, when I went in for the appointment, shared, we finally got a positive on the lupus. Now, going back to that first day when I got the prednisone and then I came back in for my test results, one of the things that he said to me was, you have more symptoms of lupus than you have of any of the other connective tissue diseases, so I'm going to treat you for lupus. And that's what he did the entire time. He treated me for lupus. And so we did that for years. And then once we got the final diagnosis that yes, it was positive for lupus, the same treatment continued, right? So nothing changed there. Of course, over time, we had to do some shifting and make some adjustments with the medication depending on pain levels and things of that nature. But ultimately, I had been getting treated for what he suspected that it was the entire time, which was a good move because it helped me to start to come around the curve and get a little bit better as it pertains to like my pain levels, which again, as I said initially, they were just excruciating. I was walking with a cane. It was really bad. And you know, I said in my introduction that despite our diagnosis, we can still live well. I do understand and want to be very mindful that when you are in the throes of these chronic illnesses or diseases and you haven't gotten your diagnosis yet, or you're just beginning your treatment, living well can feel very far-fetched. But I do want to encourage those of you that are out there that are in the beginning stages that you can live well. Like, don't lose hope because you're dealing with the pain or the chronic fatigue or the hair loss or the dry mouth or the, dry eyes or the swelling or the joint pain. Don't lose hope, because you can live a very decent life when you're dealing with chronic pain, chronic disease, or chronic illness. It's going to take some life changes. And that was one of the biggest things that over time I had to learn. Everything in my life changed, right? The sun, with lupus, the sun affects you. And so doing things in the middle of the day in the summer is something I just don't do. I'm not going to go to a barbecue or cookout or hang out at the park in the middle of the day when the sun is at its peak, because it literally irritates my skin. It can cause rashes and things of that nature. And so I have to be mindful of that. And when I say every part of my life changed, I mean every part of my life changed. From the way that I, had to approach sleep, the way that I had to approach my diet, clothes, just certain fabrics and shoes. Who would ever think that, having a lupus diagnosis would literally get you to a point where you have to really think about the types of shoes you wear and the type of clothes you wear. In some cases, even the type of jewelry that you wear. So when I say it changed my whole life, it changed my whole life. At the time, I was living in a 2-story house. I actually ended up downsizing to a rancher just because the steps had become unbearable and I just couldn't do the steps anymore. And some other life situations were going on at that time. And so it was just the right time to consider, changing even just the type of home that I lived in. And that has proven well to me, because as lupus flares come and go, you'll go through seasons where you'll stay in a flare for, it could be weeks, months, or years. And then there could be seasons where your flares and your symptoms are so minimal that, you can almost say that you're in remission and you're not feeling anything for days, weeks, months, or years, right? It just depends on the person. And everybody's lupus journey is completely different. So Shonda may have problems with her legs. Shonda may have problems with her hands and elbows and knees. But, John or Mary or Susan may have problems with, severe scalp issues, or they may have more problems with a continuous butterfly rash on their face, right? So everybody's story is different. So it's not a one size fits all, and you're not going to see everybody's symptoms. So that goes into the whole piece about lupus being an invisible illness. It is really invisible unless there's a situation where you can truly see on a person that they have the butterfly rash on their face, where you can see that there's been some trauma to the scalp because of the disease just causing scalp issues. And skin issues. Some people have terrible skin where literally it looks like they have, the skin has been eaten into because of, the lupus. And there are two types of lupus. So there is lupus that actually just affects your skin, and then lupus that affects you internally, which is SLE, and then the lupus that just affects your skin and doesn't affect any organs or muscles is called discoid. For me, I've had issues with both. So no organ failure or problems with my organs, but my skin is very, very sensitive. In certain situations and scenarios, I can get a rash. I've had rashes on my neck. I've had rashes on my face. From time to time, you may see in recordings that I'm really red right here. And that's because of the lupus as well. Again, nothing with my heart, nothing with my kidneys, and I'm very grateful and thankful for that. More of the I would say the internal issues that I have problems with is really more of the really bad muscle and joint pain. For me, that's that's my biggest issue. It's the muscle and the joint pain and the fatigue. The fatigue can become very overbearing to the point where you really can get to a place where getting up to use the bathroom could really drain you of everything that you have. Taking a shower may be the most that you can do in a day. And so, you know, it's really easy for people on the outside looking in, or even family members or friends that don't really understand all that you're going through, to kind of put a tag on you of lazy. And that's not the case. When somebody that is dealing with lupus is dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome, I don't know any way to explain it other than if you've ever had, let's say, the flu, and you were extremely, extremely tired, and every step that you took, it took every ounce of energy that you had to make that step. That's what it feels like. And really, the flu is always an example that I give to people when they ask, what does lupus feel like? It feels like the flu when you're in the worst phase of it. Like when that temperature is super high, your body is aching from head to toe, you're sweating, and it takes everything in you to turn over in the bed, to get up and walk. You don't want to eat, you don't want to do anything, you're just in pain. That is the clearest example of what lupus feels like that I could explain to someone, where I feel like everybody may have experienced at some point in their life the flu. So, you know, with that being said, that's pretty much my experience with lupus over time. The hair loss continued to get worse. It will grow back and then it will fall out. It will grow back and then it will fall out. And it was happening in patches all over my head. It was affecting the sides of my head, the middle of my head, patches in the back of my head. And so finally, in about 2018 or 2019, I made a decision that I didn't want to fight that battle anymore as it pertains to my hair. I was wearing wigs. I did everything that you could think of to try to save my hair. I did sew-ins. I went through the whole process of having the nets put on, where, you know, people could sew the hair that I had in a circle and just anchor the net onto that, so that they could do sew-ins and quick weaves, and like I said, any and everything that you can think of as it pertains to trying to still maintain some dignity in the midst of going through the storm. I did. And I would say, out of all of the symptoms that I went through with lupus, losing my hair was the most challenging one. And I decided to shave my hair, like I say, around 2018 or 2019. But even then, I never went out in public without having on a wig. I still wore wigs really all the way up until, I want to say, maybe 2023 or so, I started to feel a little bit more comfortable with just not wearing wigs in the house. I stopped wearing wigs when friends and family would come over. I just tried to make myself get comfortable with moving away from the wigs, around the people that I knew and felt the most comfortable around. And then one day I just did it, and I took the step, and I said, I'm just going to go out in public and force myself to be around people without wearing a wig. And the first time I did it was probably the scariest thing that I had ever done. And I remember seeing this lady who she just looked at me and she was like, you're wearing your baldness beautifully. And I needed that at that moment. I really needed that. For me, that was a huge confidence booster. And it just gave me the courage and the strength to continue to be bold, and stand in my truth, really, and continue to go out without wearing any hair pieces or, anything of that nature. I just stood in my truth, and I said, I'm just going to do this because at this point in my life, this is just who I am. And so people are either going to accept me or they're not. And I'm okay if anybody has a problem with it and can't accept it for whatever reason, right? So with that being said, I just started to embrace it. I just got comfortable. I said, I'm just going to put my big earrings on. I'm going to put my makeup on. I'm putting my clothes on, and I'm going out, and I'm going to be bold. I'm going to be confident, and I am going to be my best self and do what it is that I feel like I am so ready to do, and that is stop hiding from who I am and what I am in this season of my life. Now, I will say that age may have something to do with that, because I had passed the 50 mark at that time, and something about turning 50, you get to a place where you're just like, I just don't care anymore. I don't care about people's thoughts. I don't care about people's opinions. I've been on this earth now for 5 decades, and I'm just go do what I'm go do. And that's what I did. And I will honestly tell you that I have not regretted that decision, not one time. When I say freeing, it is and has been the most freeing and most liberating decision that I have ever made. And I would encourage any woman that is going through the hair loss piece with whatever medical condition that you're going through to walk boldly in yourself. Don't be afraid of public opinion and so forth, because the thing about it is people are always going to have an opinion on something. And most of the time it's something that's none of their business. And we can't let people's opinion dissuade us from walking in our truth. And I did that for too long, which is actually even kind of surprising for me, because I'm not the type of woman that cares about usually. I don't care what people think. But the hair piece, I don't even know that it was so much as caring about what other people think as it was caring about what I thought. Because deep down inside, I hadn't accepted it myself. And so it was hard for me to be bold in the face of others when it was something that I had not even accepted for myself. Once I accepted it, my true personality kind of started to come back to life, I would say, because then I didn't care what people thought. It was like, this is me, this is who I am, like it or lump it. So if you are struggling with any type of autoimmune disease, not just lupus, but anything else, right? Or any kind of sickness, I encourage you to always walk in your truth. Don't let people make you feel small, and love yourself where you are in whatever phase of life that you are in, because life is short. It may seem like we have a long time, but life is really short, and it's definitely too short to be shrinking ourselves because of other people. So if you are still with me, thank you for hearing my story. If you have any questions, I encourage you to drop them below. I will be reviewing and responding to comments. And if you're interested in more in-depth videos about some of the changes that I had to make as it pertains to diet and clothes that I wore, shoes, you know, any of those things, I'm happy to go into a lot more detail about that. But yeah, share with me below like any other information that you love to see content about, because I want to make sure that I'm giving you what you need. Ultimately, my goal is to really just highlight that even though we go through challenges in life and we struggle with sickness and disease, you know, it does not mean that we can't still live well. We can still live well. We can. Even in some of the roughest moments, we can still live well. And I just believe that as a community, we need to continue to uplift and encourage one another, so that we can keep hope alive, and just, you know, always be mindful that it's not the end. It's not the end. It's a part of the journey that we all have to go through. And this journey is a thing called life. And as we live life, we want to do everything we can to live our best life, even in the throes of the storms. So thank you for hearing my story.